Hello and welcome to my video all about how to do the cable cast on. The cable cast on is a popular method because it produces an attractive, neat and stable edge. It's quite firm and not as stretchy as many other cast-ons, but it does provide support, so it's good for edges that need to hold their shape, such as the edges around buttonholes. Right, so the first thing you need to do is tie a slip knot in your yarn, about 8 inches or so from the end. You just need enough of a yarn tail to weave into your knitting later on. Then place this slip knot onto your knitting needle and tighten. Because the cable cast on requires at least 2 stitches to be on the needle, you need to use a different method to add the second stitch, and we're going to use the knitted cast on. So just take your right hand needle up through the slip knot as if to knit, and do all of the usual steps of a knit stitch, except don't slip the stitch off the end of the needle. Instead, pull the right hand needle towards you to make a large loop of yarn, and then transfer this loop of yarn onto the left hand needle, like so. And now we have enough stitches to do the cable cast on. So first, take your right hand needle between the 2 stitches. Make sure you're only going in between the stitches rather than into the stitches, like so. And then the rest of the steps are the same as the knitted cast on we just did. So do all of the steps of a knit stitch, but don't slip the stitch off the needle. Instead, pull the needle back to make a larger loop and transfer the loop to the left hand needle. Note that once you've cast on a stitch, you don't want to pull the stitch tight, you want to leave it a bit loose. This will make it a lot easier to get your needle in between those last 2 stitches to make the next stitch. And just carry on repeating this until you've cast on as many stitches as you want. And then you should have something that looks like this. I then just knit some stockinette stitch to make the edge easier to see. The resulting cast on edge has a twisted rope-like appearance, is a bit stretchy, and it holds its shape well. You might notice, however, that the right corner is very curved, more so than on the left. And obviously the left corner will have a knot where the slip knot is, which reveals a hole if you pull on it. I'm now going to show you a variation on the cable cast on, and it's my favourite method, because it means you don't have a knot in your cast on edge, and also it eliminates that curved corner, to make both corners look the same. To do this variation, you need to cast on 3 extra stitches compared to the number of stitches you want to end up with. So if you want to end up with 11 stitches, you need to cast on 14. These 3 extra stitches will be added as 2 E-wraps at the beginning, and then 1 cable cast on at the end. Don't worry if this seems complicated, I promise it's straightforward. So since we don't want to make a slip knot this time, you first need to hold the yarn against the knitting needle in your left hand, like so. Make sure the yarn tail is about 8 inches. Then grip the working yarn in your right hand with the bottom 3 fingers. Take your index finger over the yarn, down, under, and over again so you end up pointing away from you. Then take the left hand needle point up through the loop of yarn around your finger to transfer it, like this. And that's 1 E-wrap completed. So take your index finger over the yarn, behind, under, and over again. And then take your left hand needle up through the loop to transfer it. And there you go, you now have 2 E-wraps on your needle. And you can now just do the normal cable cast on method. In this example, I want to end up with 11 stitches in total. So since I need 3 extra stitches, I'll carry on casting on until I have 14 on my needle. I'll then eliminate those 3 extra stitches on the first row of knitting. So as before, you just take your needle between the 2 stitches, do most of the steps of a knit stitch, pull the needle towards you to make a larger loop, and then transfer that loop to the left hand needle. So just carry on with the cable cast on for as long as you need. And now we're on to the first row of knitting. And the first thing we're going to do is eliminate one of those extra stitches. And we're going to do this by doing a K2 tog. This is very simple to do because all you're doing is knitting 2 stitches together, like so. As I said, this gets rid of one of those extra stitches, and it also makes the corner much sharper. Note that if the first stitch on your first row is a purl stitch, then you would instead do a P2 tog or purl 2 together. You then just need to carry on knitting the rest of the row as normal, but just stop before the 2 E-wraps at the end. As you can see, I'm just doing knit stitches across this row. Once you reach those E-wraps, you just need to drop them off the needle, like so. Then pull on the yarn slightly to tighten up that corner. I'm now just going to do some stockinette stitch and then I'll show you the result. Okay, so here you can see that there's no knot in the edge now, and even if you pull on the yarn tail, there's no hole. Plus that right hand corner is much less curved. So I'm sure you can now see why I prefer this method. And one last thing, if you're wondering if it matters how you hook the yarn loop over the needle point, I'm now going to do an experiment. For the first third of the stitches, I'm going to use the method that I normally use, transferring the yarn loop with the needles pointing in the same direction, as you can see. Then the next batch of stitches I transferred with needles pointing towards each other, like so. And the last batch were transferred with needles pointing in the same direction. I basically just transferred the yarn loops 3 different ways. I then did a bit of stockinette stitch, and here you can see how the edge now looks. All of the cast on stitches have the same sort of appearance, but particularly the stitches created using the last method stand out to me as bulkier. That's because these stitches have a bit more twist, which makes them firmer and a little less stretchy. However, I personally don't see much difference between the other 2 methods. So really, any method will work well, but that third method can be used if you want a slightly firmer edge. Just make sure that whichever method you do choose, you stick to that one for the entire cast on. And that's it, that's how you do the cable cast on. I really hope that was useful for you, and thank you very much for watching.